everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to review the books that I read in the month of June, which is not that many because I'm continuing this non-reading kind of spree. And it's not even that I'm not reading, it's that I'll read very heavily for about 3-4 days. I'll read an entire book and then I don't read for 2 weeks and then I start reading again. So it's very sparse reading, even though technically I am continuously reading in a source. So it's very, very strange. But you know what? July is already looking much better. I think things are going to turn around. I'm very excited for what I'm going to read in July. I've already finished one book. And anyway, we'll discuss that later. Let's get through the books that I have read in June. So I started the very first book with Eat the Buddha, Life and Death in a Tibetan Town. This is a nonfiction by Barbara Demick. She wrote the very, very excellent Nothing to Envy, Ordinary Lives in North Korea. Both of these books are absolutely fantastic, highly, highly recommended. What I like about Barbara Demick is that she gives you a very good general summary of a topic and presenting it from the voices of the people. So I've read a lot of nonfiction about North Korea, for example, and even about a lot of nonfiction about China and the Communist Party, which will come in play for the Tibetan book. But it definitely, those books very often follow the movement of the government itself, while Barbara Demick really goes and looks at basically the ordinary lives of the people in there. So she did that for North Korea. And then with her newest book, which came out in paperback this year, which was basically my most anticipated book of the year. So I'm so glad I've read it already. But yeah, she revisits the same idea. So she visits the town of Naba, and she separates the book in 4 parts. So it starts off with the first part from 1958 to 1976. The second part is from 1976 to 1989. The third part is from 1990 to 2013, and then the part 4 is from 2014 to present day, Tibet. And it basically starts off with the end of one of the last remaining kingdoms of Tibet. China basically forces the end of the ancient way of ruling Tibet, where all the different regions were ruled by kingdoms and they sort of managed their domain and they interacted with one another. But China wanting Tibet to be not as much of an independent region and really wanting it to be part of China, really from 1958 on, really started to put pressure on them and started to really manipulate the Tibetan people to follow the Chinese way. And it's absolutely fantastic and just really, really goes to the heart of the matter. And what I like about it is that it follows all aspects of the people. So we followed the last princess of the last kingdom. It followed some of the ordinary people, some of the farmers. It also kind of followed middle class. It followed people who decide to go more along the Tibetan ways and become monks, but it also follows people who decide to follow more the Chinese ways to sort of make sure that they weren't going to be, left to not be ridiculed by the Chinese government, but to be dominated by the Chinese government. So this was incredibly fascinating. Absolutely love it. I learned so much about Tibet and about how the Communist Party ruled over Tibet and tries to continue to rule over Tibet. Barbara Demick is so thorough. She visited the town many times, which was very dangerous for her because China will not let foreign reporters go into these areas of Tibet, not without heavy, heavy, heavy supervision. But she's very thorough. She only interviews people to whom she can have backstories, basically. What's the word? If one person tells a story, then another person can confirm that story. She goes and interviews the Dalai Lama several times, and it's just absolutely fascinating. And each person in the story, you really just feel for them, and you feel for the struggles. And it's a very difficult situation, and it's just so fascinating. It's yeah, Barbara Demick did a absolutely fantastic job, and it's lingered on me because just this past week there was an article on CNN about the very new bullet train that connects Tibet to the main area of China, and how in the article for this new event, the Chinese had provided pictures of Tibetans in their very traditional dress actually riding these trains. And it just made me think of the propaganda that Barbara Demick covered in this book, and how Tibetans are kind of forced into these picture perfect scenarios that kind of helps China look good, but not necessarily something that they like. So she doesn't mention that because this was just a past event, but I would have been really interested to see what the people of this town, Naba, would have thought of this whole new bullet train connecting them to China. So very fascinating, super fantastic. Eat the Buddha, and I mean, Nothing to Envy, two very, very fantastic nonfictions. And I can't wait until she writes something new. So then I followed that up with the book Child of Fortune by Yuko Tsushima, who is the daughter of Osamu Dazai. And interestingly enough, so Osamu Dazai is one of the top literary figures in Japan, and so she is the daughter of him. And interestingly enough, her daughter has also recently won a literary prize. I think maybe 2 years or so. I haven't read that one, but it's so wonderful seeing such a literary family. But this is she wrote Child of Fortune. I have already read her other book, which was Territory of Light, which I must admit I preferred. But what I really like about Yuko Tsushima is, even though this book I didn't like as much as the other one, I just love her writing. I love her use of light and darkness when she writes. And she really is very good about covering the story of the single mother in Japan, which is a very ignored demographic in Japan. If you were to look, I mean, in the current present situation with the COVID-19 pandemic, single mothers were actually the demographic that was most impacted financially in Japan, just because single mothers tend to have a lot of the part-time jobs, and those were the jobs that were basically canceled at the very, very beginning. So a lot of them lost their jobs, and they lost the ability to provide for their children. So it's a demographic that's not very covered very often in Japanese literature as well. Usually a lot of Japanese literature likes to either go in the romance way with the very, very young couples in high school and college, or older couples where usually it's a man having an affair, which kind of tired of those books. But basically that's a very common topic. So single mothers is not something that's covered very often. But this book was I mean, even if I didn't like it so much as Territory of Light, it's still fantastic. It's basically about this single mother and who's raising her daughter, but she's kind of failed at that, and so her daughter is actually being raised by her sister, and she becomes pregnant by a man who was actually the friend of her former lover, husband type relationship. And you see her kind of falling in love with this idea of pregnancy, but while also hesitating with the idea of being pregnant at her age and at her status, especially considering that she hesitated to have a child, especially because she never really had strong relationships with the men she had. She always had very difficult relationships. I mean, her most fond lover was actually married to another woman. So this is not a woman who shies away from married men, for example. So she's not exactly the best example of, a proper demure kind of woman. So the idea of her getting pregnant is something that a lot of people critique about her, and it's just the way the author goes through those emotions and goes through those feelings and really describes the sort of panic that a single mother can go to, but almost a sort of delusion that this main character goes through, was really, really absolutely fantastic. And once again, the use of light and darkness. There's a lot of dream imagery in this book, which is really, really interesting. And there's just so many themes and points and topics that are covered in this very, very short book, that it would be very worth it to reread this and to reread Territory of Light. Yuko Tsushima is really, really a fantastic author, and I thought this was good. I mean, it's good. There's so much, especially since you find out something about the single mother and her situation, and you feel devastated for her. It's just very, very, very impactful. So then the third and the last book that I read this month, which was the book I read at work during lunch, was Sing, Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward. This was one of the books that I picked up on a whim at a book sale here in Tokyo, and I'm very glad I did, because this was also very fantastic. Jesmyn Ward's writing is superb. I don't know how to describe it. Actually, no, I do know how to describe it, because this is the thought I had when I was reading this, is that it reminded me of Carson McCullers. Oh my goodness. What is it? Let me look for it. There we go. I should have prepared this ahead of time. Carson McCullers' The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. It really reminded me of this book, in the sense that The Heart of the Lonely Hunter really goes after race relations and the status of poor people, and basically how poor people will always be poor, and poor people will always be in dire straits. But when it comes to being poor, it's still better to be a poor white person than it is to be a poor black person. And Carson McCullers really goes after the idea of wondering if this situation will ever get better as society progresses. And so I felt like Sing, Unburied Sing was almost kind of like an answer to that book, a continuation of that book, that shows that no, nothing's changed, and it's still better to be a poor white person than it is to be a poor black person. And we've added on to that idea with the fact that we have a mixed couple, a mixed race couple, and then they have mixed race children. But this book was absolutely beautiful. What is it about? It's basically about this young boy being raised by his mother, who is a drug addict. His father is in prison, and he's basically raising his sister on his own, because his mother just is not very adept at being a mother. And it's sort of the relationship between him, his sister, him and his mother, and him and his grandparents, because they do live with his mother's parents. And it's just this beautiful family saga that really goes through very difficult moments, and you can't help but feel for them. And what's interesting is that it really brings in this sort of a fantastical element, where basically on his mother's side of the family, there's the ability to hear or even see dead people. And so that brings in a character from his grandfather's past that really just brings this heavy sense of hardship and just devastation to the book. And it's a hard book, but Jesmyn Ward's writing is just absolutely beautiful. I mean, this is absolutely a beautiful book, heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, but fantastic, and I would definitely recommend reading this one. After that, that was the end of the books I read. I did read some manga. I read volumes 1 through 5 of Orange, which made me cry so many times. It's just this, it's about a group of friends who, there's a new kid in town, and basically they received a letter from their future selves 10 years in the future, telling them, you need to save this new transfer student. Like, don't invite him over the first day of school. You need to save him, because 10 years from now he's not going to be here with us. And it's the most beautiful tale of like friendship and just being supportive and being there and listening, being available, and just this idea of communication, and like also being yourself, like not losing yourself, because like our main character has like her future self has a lot of regrets because she never followed through her feelings, because she was always worried about how other people would react. Like, oh, if I followed my feelings in this sense, I would be seen as selfish and I would be taking away opportunity from someone else. And in truth, you know, you have to still live your own life and not deny yourself these opportunities. And so she really it's just beautiful. I cried so many times reading this. Turns out there's a volume 6 that I didn't know about, and it's actually sort of a sequel to this. It shows what happens in the future after this. So I bought that, and I'll be reading this in July. Volume 6, I'll be reading this July. I'm really, really excited about it. But yeah, I read this and I was just so heartbroken, and it's so good and it made me cry. And the thing is that, like, yeah, you can be cynical about it and you can think, oh, you know, they're putting a lot of emphasis on a high school relationship, blah, 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 blah. But you know what? It's just heartwarming. It's fantastic. So yeah. So that's what I read. I am in the middle of a few books, which will become my July books. I started reading volume 3 finally of Story of the Stone. I do plan on reading volumes 3, 4, and 5 in July. My goal is to basically to have this read, because it's been, I mean, I'm loving it. I love this kind of story, and I just I'm excited to see where it leads me. So you can look forward for this in July. I'm also halfway through Chichitoran by Kawakami Mieko. So this is Breast and Eggs. This is actually the original Breast and Eggs, not the Breast and Eggs that's currently popular on BookTube, the English translation. The big Breast and Eggs is actually a translation of her book called Natsumonogatari, which means summer story. Breast and Eggs is actually a very short novella, and so I'm reading the original novella. I'm not reading the edition that became the English translation, if that makes any sense. But I do hope to finish this. I mean, I'm already halfway through. It doesn't look like I'm halfway through, but there's actually Breast and Eggs, and then there's another short story after it. So I'm halfway through Breast and Eggs, and then I'll have to read the short story in this. But yeah, that's by Mieko Kawakami, and very excited. It's very interesting. But then I was reading that, but then I really wanted to read this as well, because the English translation just came out in June, and that is Murasaki no Skirto no Onna by Imamura Natsuko. And this, it's translated to the woman or the lady. I think it's the woman in the purple skirt. It just came out in June in English, which is why I wanted to have this read in June so I could talk to you about it. But I will read this in July. But yeah, both of these were Akutagawa Prize winners. And yeah, which is a prize that I really, really like. And this is so much easier to read than that other book. That other book is actually kind of hard. This one's super, super easy. So I'll whiz right through this one. But yeah, this is what I'll be tackling in July. But started in June. So yeah, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video, which will be a book haul video. So see you then. Bye.